She was standing in line for first class when it happened, the moment that would turn a routine boarding into a headline. It started with a sharp, unexpected noise. A wooden cane smacked the floor, rolling loudly across the marble tiles, drawing eyes from every direction. Gasps spread like ripples in a pond. Conversations stopped. The usual shuffle of passengers paused mid-step. A woman in her mid-60s stood frozen at the entrance to the boarding gate, her arm still raised in defense. Her dark skin contrasted sharply with the polished white of the terminal walls. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The slap had done all the talking. What made the silence more deafening wasn't just the sound. It was what came before it. 30 minutes earlier, the airport was running on its usual frantic rhythm. Announcements echoed overhead, flight numbers and last calls buzzing through the air like static. People darted across the terminal, dragging tired luggage, balancing coffees, texting, pacing. Gate 14, though, had its own little world of tension brewing. First-class passengers were beginning to gather, ready to board early and avoid the rush. The gate agent smiled politely, scanning tickets, while a flight attendant hovered just beyond the boarding line, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning each face. She was tall, blonde, poised, Alyssa Monroe, known among her co-workers for her efficiency and strict attention to detail. She stood with practiced posture, hair in a tight bun, lipstick untouched after hours. She took pride in her role, especially when managing first class. To her, first class wasn't just a section. It was a reflection of the airline's image, and she was determined to protect it. That's when Evelyn Rhodes walked up. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. No entourage, no expensive bags. But everything about her was precise. She wore a fitted emerald coat with a high collar and silver buttons, her salt and pepper hair styled into soft waves. Around her neck, a silk scarf was tucked just so, elegant, but understated. Her cane, carved from rich mahogany, wasn't decorative. It was used, yes, but well maintained. It matched her, composed, dignified, rooted. Evelyn moved with a certain grace that didn't need approval. She didn't hesitate or glance around for validation. She simply approached the gate with quiet certainty and waited her turn like anyone else. But Alyssa noticed her the moment she stepped forward. At first, it was just a glance. Then it lingered. Something about Evelyn made Alyssa uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was how effortlessly Evelyn carried herself, how she didn't look around nervously like others, who wandered into first class by mistake. Maybe it was the confidence. Or maybe it was something deeper, something Alyssa didn't want to admit even to herself. Because in Alyssa's mind, something didn't fit. The cane, the age, the color of her skin. None of it matched the picture she had painted of who typically belonged in first class. So she assumed the obvious. There must have been a mistake. Evelyn stepped closer to the boarding area, holding her leather ticket wallet loosely in her hand. Alyssa moved quickly, intercepting her before she could reach the scanner. "Ma'am," she said, firm but polite. "This area is for first-class passengers only." Her tone was clipped, professional, but laced with condescension, the kind that wasn't written in her training manual. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, I know." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. She opened her wallet and began to extend the ticket. But Alyssa didn't take it. Instead, she stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "I'm going to need you to step aside," she said, louder now. Passengers nearby turned their heads, sensing something was off. Evelyn didn't budge. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice still measured. "Yes," Alyssa said, crossing her arms. "You're not allowed to board yet." A small pause hung in the air. Evelyn remained still, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something hard to define. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stared at Alyssa, as if seeing straight through her. And that's when Alyssa's frustration broke through the surface. She reached out, not gently, and tried to snatch the ticket from Evelyn's hand. But Evelyn pulled back instinctively, and in a moment of pure, unchecked emotion, Alyssa's hand slapped down hard, missing the ticket and hitting Evelyn's wrist. The contact echoed louder than it should have. Evelyn's cane slipped from her grip and fell to the floor. That's when the world stopped. Every sound in the gate area vanished. People stood frozen, stunned by what they'd just witnessed. Some clutched their carry-ons tighter, some glanced at their phones, others simply stared. No one moved. Alyssa blinked, almost as if realizing what she'd done, only after it happened. But Evelyn, she didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head to look at the cane lying on the floor, then back at Alyssa. Her eyes weren't filled with rage. They were filled with something worse. Disappointment. The kind that makes you feel small without a word being spoken. And then she said the line that would change everything. Quiet, precise, deadly serious. "You've just made the worst mistake of your career." Passengers started whispering. Some pulled out their phones. Alyssa stepped back, suddenly unsure. But the damage was done. The slap wasn't just a physical act. It had exposed something ugly, something festering beneath the surface. And Evelyn had felt it before, many times. In boardrooms, in hotels, in classrooms. But never like this, never so public, never so personal. Because what Alyssa didn't know, what nobody at that gate knew, was that Evelyn Rhodes wasn't just a first-class passenger. She wasn't just some well-dressed retiree. Evelyn Rhodes was the founder and majority shareholder of the airline. The woman whose name was etched into the metal plaque in the executive lounge. The one who had built the company from nothing. And today, she had come to fly. Not as a CEO, not as a VIP, but simply as a woman who still had to prove she belonged, even when she built the very space she was being denied. And the worst part? Alyssa still didn't know who she'd just struck. The sound of the cane hitting the floor still echoed in the air, but it was nothing compared to the slap that had come before it. Lightning quick, instinctive, and born out of something far deeper than mere impatience. Alyssa Monroe stood frozen, her outstretched hand slowly lowering, as if reality was catching up to her second by second. Around her, a silence had settled so thick it was suffocating. The passengers who had been minding their own business moments ago were now wide-eyed, lips parted, watching something they knew, instinctively, was about to unravel into something bigger. No one spoke, but the energy in the room had changed. Everyone could feel it. Something sacred had been broken. Evelyn Rhodes didn't move at first. Her gaze dropped slowly to the cane lying on the polished floor, its carved handle resting at an awkward angle, then returned to Alyssa with that same quiet intensity. There was no fury in her eyes, no drama, just something infinitely more unsettling, a look of recognition, of history repeating itself yet again. She didn't look at Alyssa like an opponent. She looked at her like someone who had seen this moment 1,000 times before in different forms, different places, with different names. And here it was again. Same roots, same sting. Alyssa, still breathing hard, took a shaky step back. She wasn't sure what she had expected Evelyn to do. Yell? Cry? Call for help? None of that happened. Instead, Evelyn bent slowly, gracefully, and picked up her cane. Her fingers lingered for a moment on the smooth wooden handle as if drawing strength from it. Then she stood tall, taller than seemed possible for someone her age. When she spoke, her voice was steady, low, but carried a weight that wrapped itself around every eardrum in the vicinity. "You should be very careful who you put your hands on," she said, "because you may not know who they are, but they will always know who you are." She didn't raise her voice, Yet everyone heard her, clear as crystal. Alyssa flinched like she'd been physically pushed. "I've told you already," Alyssa shot back, trying to regain her balance. "This is first class. I don't know what kind of mistake the system made, but people don't just walk up to this gate unless they're supposed to be here." She tried to project confidence, but her words were shaky, her face flushed, and her hands, trembling slightly, betrayed her inner panic. She looked around, hoping for backup, for someone to step in and reaffirm her belief that she was just doing her job. But the crowd didn't move. No one stepped forward. No one nodded. She was alone now. Evelyn didn't respond right away. She took a long breath, as if giving Alyssa one last chance to stop digging deeper. But the young flight attendant kept going, blinded by pride, by protocol, by the insidious thought that maybe she was right. "This area," Alyssa continued, "is reserved for guests with a verified first-class boarding pass. I'm not going to allow someone to sneak through just because they're confident." The word sneak hit like a slap all its own. You could hear it echo in the silence. A few passengers visibly recoiled. A man in a business suit looked down, as if ashamed to be standing near this mess. A middle-aged woman clutched her bag tighter, her eyes flicking back and forth between Evelyn and Alyssa with growing concern. Evelyn's face remained unreadable, her expression composed, but her silence had now turned deafening. She slowly pulled out her boarding pass from her coat pocket. It was in a leather case, the kind you don't get from economy check-in. She unfolded it with deliberate care and held it out toward Alyssa, who snatched it from her hand with more force than necessary. She looked down at the ticket, and the expression on her face changed immediately. First, skepticism, then confusion, and then something close to fear. Seat 1A, Flight 272. Name, Evelyn Rhodes. The name meant nothing to Alyssa at first. It was just a name, but something about it nagged at her, tugged at her memory. And as she looked closer, down in the corner, beneath the standard seat details, she saw the words she hadn't been prepared for: executive priority, founder tier. Founder tier. Her stomach dropped. Still holding the ticket, Alyssa looked up slowly. "Wait, Rhodes?" she said aloud, the words escaping her before she could stop them. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to. Alyssa's voice cracked as the pieces clicked together. Rhodes wasn't just a name on a ticket, it was the name. The name on the plaques in the corporate offices, the name that came up during orientation. Evelyn Rhodes, founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of Skylux Airlines. Alyssa felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. She took a step back, the ticket still in her hand like it had burned her. You're her." Her voice was barely above a whisper now, suddenly fragile. Evelyn tilted her head. And what would her look like exactly? Her tone was calm, but the question hit like a hammer. Alyssa opened her mouth, but no words came out. No excuse, no defense, just the growing awareness of what she had done. The nearby passengers, now fully tuned in, began murmuring. A few people who had been recording earlier lowered their phones slightly, realizing the depth of what they'd just captured. Others raised theirs higher, knowing this moment would not end here. The tension was electric. Every breath felt louder than usual. Every second stretched into a minute. From across the terminal, a man in a suit approached briskly. Richard Bennett, Director of Operations for the airline. His face was stone cold. He didn't ask questions, didn't wait for a debrief. He simply walked up to Evelyn, nodded deeply, almost bowed, and said, "Mrs. Rhodes, I am so sorry for what just occurred. On behalf of the entire airline, I offer my sincerest apology." His words echoed through the quiet like an announcement. Alyssa's jaw dropped. This was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She had just assaulted the most powerful woman in the entire company. But Evelyn didn't respond to Richard right away. She turned her eyes back to Alyssa and said one final sentence that would ring in Alyssa's ears for years to come. "You thought I didn't belong here, but it's you who doesn't belong." That's when the weight of it all truly hit. Alyssa's posture sagged, her face turned pale. And the crowd? They weren't angry, they weren't outraged, they were silent, watching, judging, remembering. Because what happened at Gate 14 that day wasn't just a violation of policy. It was a moment when prejudice met power and lost. And for Alyssa Monroe, it was the day her entire life changed. The day she learned the most important lesson of her career, the hardest way imaginable. For a long moment, Alyssa couldn't breathe. The name still echoed in her ears, Evelyn Rhodes. Not Evelyn, the polite elderly woman she'd dismissed without thought, but Evelyn, the founder, the face behind the brand, the woman whose story had been taught in the onboarding video she barely remembered, the very person whose life's work she had just insulted, dismissed, and physically disrespected in front of dozens of passengers. It wasn't just shame creeping in now, it was fear. The kind that settles in your bones when you realize something isn't just bad, it's irreversible. She had struck, humiliated, and falsely accused the very woman who owned the sky she worked in. Passengers stared openly now, whispering behind cupped hands, exchanging glances loaded with disbelief and tension. The quiet was thick with anticipation. Everyone expected something to happen, something loud, something final. They waited for Evelyn to explode, to lash out, to make a public declaration. Instead, Evelyn stood tall, cane in hand, silent and composed in a way that carried more weight than any tantrum ever could. Her power wasn't in volume, it was in presence. A presence that now towered over Alyssa like a mountain she could never climb. And then came Richard Bennett again, his voice firmer this time, his expression less measured. "Mrs. Rhodes, please allow us to escort you to the VIP boarding area," he said quickly, his eyes flicking to Alyssa with a barely hidden storm behind them. "We will be addressing this matter immediately." Evelyn looked at him briefly, then back at Alyssa, then finally to the crowd. She gave a single nod, turned without another word, and walked toward the gate doors. Each step she took seemed to land like a drumbeat in Alyssa's ears. The crowd parted instinctively to let her through, passengers stepping aside like royalty was passing through. In a way it was, just not the kind they expected. And then Evelyn was gone. Just like that. No drama, no shouting, no lawsuit threats, just a quiet exit filled with implications. But Alyssa wasn't off the hook, not even close. The very next moment, two uniformed airline officials approached her. One held a folder, the other held a badge. No handcuffs, no yelling. But the silence they brought was colder than any reprimand. "Ms. Monroe, we need you to step away from the gate immediately," one of them said flatly. "This incident will be escalated to upper management. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately pending further investigation." Alyssa nodded mechanically. The words barely registered. She couldn't look anyone in the eye, especially not the people still watching, still whispering. She could feel the burn of every camera lens pointed in her direction. She could almost hear the headlines forming. She was led away, not dragged, just walked, slowly, quietly, like a prisoner walking her own path toward sentencing. And the passengers? Some looked away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Others kept recording, knowing this would go viral by morning. But one thing united them all. They would remember her face, her uniform, her name tag, and most of all, the moment she lost everything. In the hours that followed, the airline's internal channels buzzed like a hive. Legal teams were looped in. HR representatives were called into emergency meetings. Senior executives demanded incident reports, statements from witnesses. copies of every piece of video captured. It wasn't just a PR crisis, it was an existential problem. How does an airline built on luxury, excellence, and equality explain this? How do they allow this to happen to her, the woman whose name sat above the company's mission statement? That night, Evelyn didn't make a press statement. She didn't post on social media. But behind closed doors, she made her position crystal clear. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug, but neither would it be handled with vengeance. Evelyn didn't want headlines. She wanted change. The next morning, a closed-door meeting was held with senior leadership. Alyssa, now dressed in a plain blouse and slacks, her badge surrendered, her ID disabled, sat at the far end of a long, polished table. The room was painfully bright. Opposite her sat 4 executives, including Richard Bennett and the VP of Human Resources. They reviewed the incident in full detail, from start to finish. Every line of dialogue, every action, every pause. And then finally the door opened again, and Evelyn walked in. Her presence silenced the room instantly. She didn't look at Alyssa at first. She walked straight to the head of the table, sat down, and placed her cane across her lap. Then she looked up, her expression unreadable. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Not the executives. Not Alyssa. The tension was unbearable. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "I don't want her fired." It was the last thing anyone expected. A couple of the board members exchanged puzzled glances. Richard leaned forward, clearly caught off guard. "Mrs. Rhodes, with all due respect." Evelyn raised a hand gently, silencing him without a word. "What Alyssa did," she said slowly, "was unacceptable. Unprofessional, deeply offensive. But it wasn't unfamiliar. What she did is what happens every day. Only most of the time there aren't cameras. Most of the time the people it happens to don't have power or a platform. And that's why this matters." She turned her eyes to Alyssa, who had barely looked up since the meeting started. This airline was built to be better. Not perfect, but better. We serve people from every walk of life, every color, every income bracket. And if we don't reflect that in our own staff, then we're just another polished lie. A pause. Then Evelyn continued. "So here's what I want. She doesn't fly. Not for now. She learns, she trains, she listens. I want her in every single diversity, bias, and ethics course we have. Weekly reports, supervised mentorship. And when she's ready, when she understands what it really means to serve every passenger with respect, then we'll see." It wasn't mercy. It was responsibility. And it was harder than being fired. Alyssa sat there, stunned, tears beginning to form. Not because she had been spared, but because she had been seen, flawed, exposed, but not discarded. She hadn't earned a second chance, but she'd been given one, and that was more terrifying than any punishment. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice quiet again. "I didn't build this airline for people like me. I built it for the people who have always been told they don't belong. If we can't hold each other accountable, then we've failed, and I refuse to fail." And with that she stood, took her cane, and walked out. Not with revenge, with resolution. The meeting didn't end with a punishment. It ended with a promise, a reckoning, a reminder that some lessons are meant to break you before they rebuild you. And for Alyssa Monroe, that breaking had just begun. For the first time in months, Alyssa Monroe stood in front of her closet, not looking for a uniform, not reaching for the perfectly pressed blouse or polished heels she used to wear with pride. Instead, she reached for something simple: neutral slacks, a modest cardigan, flats without shine. Her makeup was minimal, her hair down, unstyled. There was no badge today, no lanyard around her neck. Nothing about her appearance carried the usual crispness of a flight attendant reporting for duty. Because this wasn't a return to the skies. It was a return to the scene of her greatest fall, the beginning of something she still wasn't sure she deserved. 6 months had passed since the incident at Gate 14. 6 months of sessions, readings, reflections, confrontations, with others and with herself. What began as an imposed sentence quickly became something deeper. The training wasn't corporate fluff. It was uncomfortable, confronting, raw. Each session peeled back a layer she didn't know was there. Unconscious bias, structural racism, historical exclusion. None of it was abstract anymore. It wasn't just a training module. It was the faces, the voices, the pain in people's eyes as they told stories eerily similar to the one she had created that day. She had to sit in those rooms, silent, listening as others described the same assumptions she had once made. The same dismissals, the same sting of being told, without words, "You don't belong." There were days when she wanted to walk out. Times she told herself it was too much, that she had made a mistake, but wasn't a bad person. But each time she reached for the comfort of denial, something stopped her. The memory of Evelyn's eyes, steady and sharp, not with hatred, but with a kind of disappointment that weighed heavier than anger ever could. That look stayed with her through every lecture, every essay she had to write, every group discussion that made her squirm. She didn't just learn about prejudice, she saw her own reflection in it. And now, after all that time, she was walking back into headquarters, not as a staff member, not yet, but as someone returning to face what remained. The final step in her redemption wasn't something Evelyn had requested. It was something Alyssa had asked for herself. She had submitted a formal letter weeks earlier, requesting a one-on-one debrief, not with the HR director, not with the training coordinator, but with the woman whose dignity she had tried to take and could never give back. She didn't know if Evelyn would accept. She didn't expect it. But the response had come swiftly, and it was one line. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Don't be late. Now, standing in the executive boardroom, Alyssa waited, hands folded in her lap, trying to keep her composure. The door opened quietly, and Evelyn entered, dressed in a tailored grey suit, her cane tapping rhythmically with each step. She moved with the same grace she always had, her presence filling the room before she even spoke. She sat across from Alyssa, adjusted her scarf, and looked her directly in the eyes. "So," Evelyn began, her voice calm but resolute, "tell me what you've learned." Alyssa took a breath. Her voice didn't tremble the way it used to. "I've learned," she said slowly, "that what I did to you wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was the result of 100 assumptions I never questioned. I saw you and I didn't see power. I didn't see excellence. I didn't see a person. I saw what I was taught to see without even knowing it. And I acted from that blindness." Evelyn didn't interrupt. She listened, her expression unreadable. "I've learned that racism isn't always loud," Alyssa continued. "Sometimes it's quiet. It looks like policy. It sounds like just doing my job. It hides behind tone, behind suspicion, behind the belief that some people have to prove themselves more than others, just to be treated equally. And I used to think I was fair, that I didn't see color, but the truth is, I saw it, and I let it define everything. That day at the gate, I wasn't just enforcing a rule, I was deciding who was worthy, and I got it so wrong." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then, finally, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze narrowing. "And if I hadn't been the CEO?" she asked. "If I were just another black woman trying to board her flight?" Alyssa's throat tightened. "Then I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have been suspended. I wouldn't have been forced to learn anything. And worst of all, I wouldn't have realized I was wrong. That's what scares me the most. It took your status to wake me up. And I hate that." Evelyn nodded slowly, her fingers tapping once against the wood of her cane. "Good," she said. "Hating it means you're aware. And awareness is the first step. But it's not the last." She paused, then added, "Change doesn't happen because you feel bad. It happens when you make different choices. Every day, when no one's watching." Alyssa nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a few moments, a silence that didn't feel empty, but earned. Evelyn broke it. "So what do you plan to do now?" "I want to teach," Alyssa replied. "Not because I've mastered anything, but because I know what it looks like to be blind to your own bias. I want to help the next person like me see it before they destroy someone's dignity. I want to be a voice that says, 'Don't make my mistake.' Not from a pedestal, but from the place where I fell." For the first time, Evelyn's expression softened. "That," she said, "is the only kind of leadership that matters. The kind that remembers what it took to get there." And just like that, the meeting was over. Evelyn stood, gave Alyssa a nod, not of approval, but of acknowledgement, and walked out, her cane tapping once again against the floor. Alyssa sat for a long time after she left, not to soak in victory, but to let the final lesson settle in. She hadn't been forgiven. Not entirely. And that was right. But she had been seen again. Not as who she was, but as who she could become. A few months later, a group of newly hired flight attendants gathered in a training room at corporate headquarters. They were fresh-faced, excited, a little nervous. Most of them had no idea who Alyssa Monroe was. Not really, just another trainer. But when she stood in front of them and spoke, there was something in her voice that made people listen. She didn't talk down. She didn't quote policies. She told a story. Her story. About the time she let her uniform give her a sense of authority she hadn't earned. About the woman she tried to deny, and the quiet grace with which that woman held her accountable. And at the end of every session, Alyssa said the same thing. Every person who boards this plane brings more than luggage. They bring stories, battles, assumptions, pain. We don't always know what they've been through, but it is never our place to decide who deserves respect. It's our job to give it. To everyone, every time. No applause, no spotlight. Just a room full of people sitting quietly, thinking, changed by the weight of something real. And in that way, the legacy of Evelyn Rhodes extended far beyond one gate, one airline, or one mistake. Because redemption, like justice, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through the lives we touch after we've learned how to see.